While in the US Marines, I was in the real life incident that became the basis of an attempted murder episode of NCIS, Season 1, Hung Out to Dry. I was parachuting with a unit in North Carolina when the first group of Marines jumped from the plane and half the chutes didn't open. They all survived because of the reserve chutes, but had broken legs. I was in the plane and about to jump as part of the second group when the jump master closed the door and made the plane land. During questioning, NCIS found out my parachute cords were cut like the others, and they arrested and sentenced a young Marine who wanted to murder his platoon commander, but because parachutes are randomly picked by the jumper, he cut as many cords as he could. In the TV episode a lot of people die instead, but I once met a star of the show and told him my side of the story. Minding my own business making popcorn in my kitchen when I heard a knock at my door. I went to the front, pulled back the blinds on the door, and saw a man with a bandana covering his face pointing a gun at me and screaming. I turned and started running, and he started firing. Bullets ricocheted all over my house. One went straight into a door jamb and missed my head by a few inches. I hid out in my backyard with my dogs while he tried to kick my door in. When he failed, he left in a getaway car that was parked by the side yard. No idea to this day why it happened to me. The police said it was probably a case of mistaken identity. He was never caught, and I never spent another night in that house, which sucked the most. I owned it and was upside down. I don't know if this counts, but a few weeks after I started college I was almost mugged. I commuted but didn't have a license or a car, so I took the bus to and from school. Backstory: 2 steps in the wrong direction would get you in the bad part of town. On this particular night I was approached by a man in a green hoodie, appeared to be no stranger to drugs. He said, "I need you to slide me your money now." I told him I used the last bit of my money on textbooks because college, and he said, "Whatever, anything you got, I want it now." Proceeds to pull out his knife. I get reasonably frightened, but I tell him I don't have any cash on me, and the only things I have are the 6 cents in my checking account and the textbooks I bought that day, so unless you want the books, some pencils and a binder, you might as well stab me or leave me because that's all I have. He pauses, looks at me for a few seconds, then proceeds to tell me that I wasn't even worth his time and walks away. People were at the bus stop with us witnessing this unfold, said nothing and did nothing. I was pretty shaken up by that. I never wanted to ride the bus again, but had to for the next 2 years as it was my only way to and from school. I'm living on campus next year. After classes, I left the college with a friend of mine who was trying to lead me on for something to eat as a way to cheer me up. I had lost a test that day and was truly down because of it. We were going down the road, and to go further ahead you had to walk downhill, and there was another side road. Turns out that there was this guy who came from below the hill with a pistol on hand and began to shoot at random. One of the bullets hitting against a wall where my friend and I were, and that's where we scampered off to the side road. What we didn't know was that it was basically a dead end unless you counted rolling down the slopes for survival. However, he didn't follow after us. After half an hour we went back, and the police were already there, with the guy completely captured, but we still took a different place for something to eat, and never again we went that way. Not me, but a friend of mine. I go to Temple University in Philly, and if you know anything about it, you know that 1 block off campus, you could be bumping into the wrong people. My friend's apartment is off the main road, and can be pretty dark at night. As he was getting out of his car at night, 3 men had approached him and put a gun to his head. They tried to steal his car, but couldn't due to it being a manual car. As he was held at gunpoint, he tried helping them just to save his life. They eventually got angry, threw his phone, and left. He luckily was not injured, and looking back at it now, he kind of laughs at the fact they couldn't work the car. Bought a new handgun, and I had it upstairs. Tourist judge. I was loading different shells into it and testing it out. Just seeing if everything fit and whatnot. Girlfriend at the time comes over and picks it up and points it at my head while I was in bed. It was loaded and I freaked out. She still to this day probably doesn't even remember it. I sold it later on, not for myself but because of that. Not keeping a gun in the house with a moron. A year later her dad's friend got seriously hurt in a hunting accident. My neighbors at the time were drug dealers and people would park in my driveway all the time to cross the street to go their house. So I would keep it loaded in my nightstand. So I guess not really an attempt Paresi on my life, but neglect almost cost me it. Not my story, but happened to a friend's mom and too weird not to post. So, when friend's mom was in like 2nd grade or so in the 60s, she lived out on her family's farm in Kansas. Big tall cornfields everywhere. Her dad would sit out on the porch every afternoon and whistle a tune real loud, so she could run through the cornfields for fun, but still find her way toward the house easily. She kind of knew which way to head, but largely relied on the sound of his whistling. So one day, FM gets off the school bus like normal and runs straight into the cornfields. After a while she hears her dad whistling, but it sounds off. She thought it seemed like the wrong direction, and the whistle itself was just a bit different. FM didn't trust the whistle, and ran straight out the way she came, then walked the long way home around the edge of the cornfield. When she arrived home, her father wasn't home, and her mother told her one of the animals was injured, so he had gone into town for aid. FM told her mother about the whistle, and her mom never let her walk through the cornfields alone again. Dad went out there with a shotgun when he got home but found nothing. There's always a chance that this didn't happen, and she was just young and scared and hearing things, but just the thought of some creep hiding in a cornfield, making calculated whistles when they know a young girl is trusting and vulnerable, is just utterly terrifying to me. Got into a fight with a guy at party and beat him up pretty badly. Left and about an hour or so later got a call that a bunch of his friends wanted to have a rumble with my friends. So being young / dumb / drunk we all went back. I saw him standing in the doorway of the house and ran up to fight him when he swung at my head and blood came down my face. I thought he'd hit me with something, so I just started swinging and trying to grab him. He punched me a few times on my side and all of a sudden I felt like I'd had the air knocked out of me. I looked down and my shirt was covered in blood. Turns out he was stabbing me and the last one punctures my lung. I turn to run and he stabs me again in the shoulder, which causes me to fall down. He gets on top of me and is about to stab again when my friend's wife throws a huge porcelain pot at the guy and knocks him off me. We get in my friend's car and they rush me to the hospital. Memory is hazy on the events after this, but I remember the doctors and nurses trying to stop the bleeding and cops being there trying to talk to me. They make the cops leave, and I get scared, because I overhear one say they want to hear from me who did this in case I don't make it. I tell the nurse not to let me die, and she says they're doing their best, but it's not looking good. I lived in a small town and the doctors at the hospital couldn't stop the bleeding, so they had to halo flight me into the city. Woke up in the hospital and remember seeing my hand was swollen, like in a cartoon. Spent a week there, 8 stab wounds, 1 to the head, more of a slash, 6 to my left side, and 1 in the right shoulder. When I talked to the doctors afterwards they said I had died twice, and they brought me back. My wife and I had let a friend of ours stay in a spare room while he was getting his life back together. Unbeknown to us, he developed a crush on my wife. One day, tired from work, as I came home, he offered me a cookie he had made. 20 minutes later my heart began racing in a way that I hadn't experienced before or since. At one point the beating became as fast as a bee's buzzing, and then it stopped completely. I was certain I was dead, but I woke up with my wife putting a blanket over me in bed. I went in and out of consciousness the whole night. The next day she kicked him out. This is the story of my neighbor that I will say like if it happened to me. It was 2 AM when suddenly I heard noises coming from downstairs. It didn't seem right, so I tried to get a weapon. Because I had a licensed gun. I live in Greece. Because I once was a military general, I got it, but though it didn't have ammo, and I went downstairs they didn't have knives, and so I pointed the gun at them. They got a wooden chair from the table nearby, and they threw it on my head. They went to stab me, but I still had the gun on my hands, and so they just stunned me with the chair and ran away. That was a close call for me, because I'm a 60-year-old man and I cold gotten serious injuries. I think my story is close enough. I was 12 or 13, and living in a very small trailer with just my stepmom and my sister's baby. My sister was in prison and the trailer was big enough to fit a mattress in the one room. have a small shower/toilet area, and the kitchen/couch, where I slept next to the baby's crib. Small. I watched the baby at night while my stepmom worked, and she watched him during the day while I went to middle school. Anyway, one night she snaps. She's screaming at me, the baby's crying, and I'm standing up stiff. She was always unpredictable when she was angry. Suddenly she goes over to the gas stove and turns on all the burners, but not the fire, just the gas. She turns on all the gas and then sits down on the couch completely still and silent. She wouldn't look at me, but I pressed asking what she was doing. She just said the place would fill up with gas and we'd all die. Neat, tidy. I was horrified, and she wouldn't let me near the stove. Just told me to sit down and wait. Just sit and wait to die. I couldn't move, and I just stared her down for what felt like an eternity. I really don't know how long it would really take for that to happen, for us all to be gassed. It couldn't take long for a 4-month-old baby, a several asthmatic 13-year-old, and a 57-year-old woman. Eventually she broke down sobbing, and I booked into action. I shut off the stove, put her and the baby to bed, and opened the front door for a while. I couldn't open the windows because they were covered in a thick plastic and taped in place. I don't know, I've seen a lot of things, but that night just sits so uneasy with me. As an adult I've broken contact with her. I have better things to do. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more daily 6 PM Reddit uploads.